Islam was founded by a man who it was founded in a context.
Muslims in Norway are now establishing a Masjid and Dawah Center to enhance the Norwegian Dawah. If you donate to this cause, you will inshallah reap the rewards of thousands of Muslims coming back to Islam, and many of those will become du'at and invite to Islam. So click the link and donate now and share the video for extra reward. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? Now, many of you already know that the opposing views episode that I done with one Ayaan McGann, who refers to herself as Ayaan Hirsi Ali because she is a liar, and she has been lying to the Dutch parliament, and she's been lying to the public about Islam and what it entails, and she is an ignoramus, an academic charlatan, obsequious woman, a right-wing apple polisher. That individual has now, quite frankly, been exposed. If you go and watch that video, I think you will agree with me. Not many people, even from the other side, let's say, can disagree with that. But I wanted to just point on some of the things, because obviously in that opposing views format, I didn't have access to her responses, and she did not have access to my responses. So there are some things I wanted to bring to respond to, and not that she deserves a response, because I think for all intents and purposes, anyone with a shred of integrity and maybe an iota of sincerity will know that her academic career, if she ever had one in the first place, is over now, with all due respect, or none due to her. This individual, actually, by the way, I couldn't read this out in the opposing views format. I just want to give you a taste of what kind of individual she is. This is something that she mentions in one of her books. She mentions, and I quote, she was talking about Christian churches. She says, "But I think Christian churches should begin dawah." Look how she has ghil and anger, subhanallah, resentment towards the dawah, the propagation of Islam and the Muslim people. She goes, "But I think Christian churches should begin dawah, exactly as Islam does. You need to compete because you can be a powerful tool to reverse Islamization," she states. Yeah, "You should start with Muslim neighborhoods in Rome." She's talking to a priest here. And she says, "Europe is sleepwalking into disaster, cultural, ideological, and political disaster, because the authorities of the church have neglected the immigrant ghettos." She states, "The churches could go into Muslim communities, provide services just as the radical Muslims do, build new Catholic schools, hospitals, community centers, just like the ones that were such a civilizing force under colonialism in Africa." This person is not just an apostate from Islam. This person is the equivalent of the monster Uncle Tom, not Aunt Jemima, whatever the hell the equivalent Uncle Tom is. The monstrous, Uncle Tom that she is. A colonialism in Africa. She's an apostate from African identity itself, not just Islam. But not just that, and I've mentioned this and alluded to it, but I wanted to give you clarity and proof, because I did mention it in the discussion, but I wanted to mention it once more. Look what she says about Islam in her book, one of her main books. This is printed. She states, "A key problem for Islam today can be summarized in 3 simplifying sentences. Christians worship a man made divine, Jews worship a book, and Muslims worship both." She doesn't know the basics of Islam. Look at what she says here in her book, Infidel. I've read her books. Rubbish books they are. She goes, on her torso, she's talking about a particular film that was released. On her torso is written the opening verse of the Qur'an, the Surah Al-Fatiha. So she refers to an entire chapter as a verse. She doesn't know the basics, and she continues, by the way. There's other things like this, where she talks about hadith, like, for example, Al-Jannah tahta aqdam al-um, or the Jannah is under the feet of the mother. She says it's a verse of the Qur'an. She does not know how to differentiate a verse from a chapter, a verse of the Qur'an, and this person is meant to be the scholar that is telling us and teaching us about Islam. This is meant to be the scholar. Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and these individuals, they're putting her on. I want to show you the extent of her ignorance by just letting her answer a simple GCSE RE type question that she stutters I thought that this was in many ways the most telling part of the entire opposing views segment. Let's take a look at how she answers a very simple question, what the differences of Islam and Christianity are. Let's take a look.
What do you think the primary differences are that you've seen between Islam and Christianity?
The primary differences?
Primary differences, yeah.
Well, I think the primary and probably the most well-known differences is Islam was founded by a man who it was founded in a context that was tribal, very parochial, very small, and the man who founded Islam turned it into an empire.
So I'm really sorry to say this, but this academic charlatan, in addition to saying she's not knowing the basics, clearly identified by her printed works and her public display or presentations, she, in addition to that, continues lying to the public and telling people or insinuating that Islam has a forcibly or forced convert narrative, that we force people to become Muslims. Let's take a look at what she states.
Trying to get non-Muslim societies to adopt Islam either through persuasion or through force or through both of those means.
Now this, she keeps mentioning this. It's as if she has not mentioned or she has not read, and she clearly has actually, because I've seen it in one of her books, she mentions it, the verse, لا إكراه في الدين, there is no compulsion in religion. Even Arnold Walker, who wrote the book, the Preaching of Islam, an Orientalist, doesn't take this view that Islam was spread by the sword in the sense that people were forced to become Muslims en masse in where Islam conquered land. And even if there were times and places in the Islamic history where that did take place, it clearly goes against the verse, which is 256 in Surah Al-Baqarah, لا إكراه في الدين, there's no compulsion in religion. So she keeps mentioning this point, and to make Islam look like a monstrous religion. Well, she in fact is a monstrous liar. And I will say something else, that she, and I've mentioned this before, and I'll emphasize the point again, was the same individual that Anders Breivik, the individual who was responsible for killing 77 individuals, majority of them were non-Muslims, in Norway, in one of the most prolific crimes in the last 100 years. That individual dedicated an entire chapter to Ayaan Hirsi, an entire chapter he dedicated, praising her, saying that she should have won the Nobel Peace Prize, and that her views are quite commensurate with his, and that, saying good words about her, clearly inspired and influenced by her right-wing fascistic narratives. This is an individual who killed white liberal people, to put it crudely. White liberal people. You can see the extent to which her drivel can lead to actual impact on the ground. So she's talking about Islam, scapegoating it, maybe projecting her own kind of maliciousness onto it, malignancy and malevolence. The individual that is Ayaan really has no credentials to talk about these things, as we mentioned in the first place. And then McGann, she makes a series of claims about women's rights, most of which are nonsense claims. Now, this is something she did mention in some of her books, but she keeps saying it's almost impossible for a Muslim woman to get a divorce. Compared to what? Into what system? Like, for example, we're talking about other religions. Whose system is easier for it to get a divorce? Is it easier for a woman to get a divorce, or is it easier for an Orthodox Jewish woman who has to get the get? In fact, that system is much more difficult for a woman to get a divorce. The get. In some circles, a woman cannot even get a divorce without the husband's consent. Well, about Catholicism, for the longest of time, divorce was prohibited completely, and she was singing the praises of Christianity. Whereas clearly in Islam, there is such a thing as fasakh and khula, where a woman can get a divorce even without the consent of her husband. Hadith in Bukhari, لولا مخيفة الله بزقت في وجهه, and then ففرق بينهما. If it wasn't for, a woman came to the Prophet and said, had it not been for the fear of Allah, I would have spat in his face, and then he got them separated, meaning without his permission. So this kind of thing is clearly in Islam. So once again, her comically exaggerated claims, which are in fact not factual, are intended for the sole purpose of maligning Islam. And she has not quoted a single source throughout the whole video. I don't think in the entire video that she's quoted a single source, not even one, from the primary texts of Islam, let alone academic resources and so on. So she's absolutely lost. And then she mentions that women are
confined to the house.
Of course, that's not true at all. And the only verse that can be used, let me help her out a little bit, is the verse وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ, which talks to the Prophet's wives and says, and stay in your homes. And it can also be read وَقِرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ, by the way, which means, from the Arabic word waqar, which means have sakina, have tranquility in your homes, even with them. Because we know that the Prophet's wives, they left the homes. They left the homes, they went and done things. I mean, they led wars in the case of Aisha. Not to say that all of that was in her own interest, according to her own testimonies, but they definitely stayed out of the house. But you've got all kinds of sort of commandments in Islam. For example, لا تمنعوا إماء الله مساجد الله is a hadith. Do not prevent the women slaves of Allah from going to the masjids. What if a woman wants to go and see her parents? The vast majority of Islam says no one can stop her from doing that. And in fact, the husband must facilitate such a thing. What if she has to go for another reason? There's nothing to say a woman must stay in this house and be trapped like a prisoner in Islam. There's no such thing. And so that's something else which she exaggerates and lies about. But there's a series of claims that I'm looking at right here, which are, to be honest with you, too numerous to mention. But what I will, and to be honest, too comical in the first place, something that even the most basic student of knowledge will be able to dismiss. So instead of doing all of that, I will just leave you with one thought. This person has been exposed. And if you have a shred, an iota of academic integrity or sincerity in your heart, in your mind, especially if you're a non-Muslim watching this, you cannot take this kind of narrative seriously, especially coming from this kind of person. And if you really want to know about Islam, then you have to go to the sources directly. Read it for yourself. The Qur'an has been the meanings, the translations of the Qur'an have been translated many places for free. You can go on Qur'an.com. You'll find a translation of the Qur'an. Just go to the sources yourself. Go to the Muslim community. It's high time we start educating people about the religion of Islam. And enough is enough. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Muslims in Norway are now establishing a Masjid and Dawah Center to enhance the Norwegian Dawah. If you donate to this cause, you will inshallah reap the rewards of thousands of Muslims coming back to Islam, and many of those will become 𝙈𝙤𝙪𝙨 and invite to Islam. So click the link and donate now and share the video for extra rewards.